I really regret not trying this very simple technique out years ago. Passing this over was a mistake that cost me dearly in terms of lost times, lost clients, and ultimately lost money in the form of paid projects. Because once I finally figured this out, I was able to get this mix. This truly is my eureka moment. I learned the hard way that the single most important factor when recording guitar is the one thing most guitar players never even consider: the speaker. Now, once equipped with that knowledge, getting great tones became much, much simpler. With the exception of one speaker that was extremely popular once upon a time, the Celestion G12 T75. No matter what I tried, I could never get it to sound great on a recording. That is, until now. Surprise, surprise, you can indeed get a killer metal tone with something other than a vintage 30. Yes, we are allowed to do something other than what everybody else is doing. A long time ago, before the dark times, before the auto-tune, metal musicians actually had to play on their own records. Yeah, I know, weird, huh? Editing was rudimentary at best, and the T75 was the speaker of choice. You couldn't take 3 steps into a metal show in those days and not trip over a Marshall cab that was loaded with T75s. Even I had one, and I bought it because it said Marshall on it. Not because I knew what speakers were in it or even how to record it properly. I bought it because that's what everyone else was doing, and it was the thing to get. My, times certainly have changed, haven't they? So there I was, early 2000s, much thinner and proud owner of a brand new Marshall cab, an SM57 and a band in the studio ready to rock. Unfortunately, the results I got weren't exactly what I was hoping for. Turns out, the band wasn't hoping for that either. Now, I just didn't get it. So many Marshall cabs out there, and these are the results? What's the deal? So I started doing homework. I got my trusty armor-plated iPod, a notepad, go into work, make notes, burn hundreds of test CDs, check them out in the car on the way to work, and still not get the results that I wanted. Then, sometime in 2006, I got myself another Marshall cab, this time loaded with vintage 30s on recommendation from the users of the Andy Sneap forum, and had a much, much easier time getting good tones onto clients' records. The thing was, I wasn't the only one. More and more people at the time were beginning to record vintage 30s because it was easy to get great results. Plug in a 5150, add an overdrive, throw up a 57, and you're basically there. And because of social media hive mind mentality, the vintage 30 became the go-to standard for anyone wanting to record metal tones, and the T75 was thrown into the trash heap of history. And for the longest time I thought, great, the T75 sucked anyway. Unfortunately, these days, it seems like the evolution of metal tone hit a dead end with the vintage 30. And metal itself has gone from a progressive, bleeding-edge musical genre to a recyclery, focusing on physical feats rather than quality songwriting. To put it plainly, the vintage 30 has become boring. Because when everybody's special, no one is. Now, a couple things happened over the last year or so that have made me revisit the hated T75. First, a couple of guys on the SMG Discord have been experimenting with some vintage T75s and have been getting some spectacular results. And second, I've learned that 2 of my all-time favorite guitar tones were recorded using the T75. Ozzy Osbourne's No More Tears, and Carcass Heartwork. Now those albums don't sound like anything I've ever recorded. So the question remains, how the hell did they get those sounds? Turns out I've had the answer staring me in the face all along, but I'll get to that in a second. Now, the final factor came out of a conversation between myself and Christian Vade. You guys have seen Christian on the show before. He's a brilliant player and has helped me put some guitar myths to rest, much to the outrage of pickup manufacturers and the scammers trying to sell solid body electrics labeled as tonewood. Now, Christian had been telling me about his old Marshall cab that sounded incredible. Now, given the age and just how much he was ranting about it, I assumed that it was loaded with a nice set of vintage greenbacks, the classic rock speaker that has wound up on countless records. So he brought it over, and imagine my disappointment when I looked at the back and read 300 watts. That can only mean one thing: the dreaded T75. Little footnote for all you drummers out there: 475 watt speakers equals 300 watts. Anyway, I'm like, Christian, really? This is the cabinet you've been going on and on about? And Christian was adamant that it indeed did sound great. And since I'm forever pointing out that musicians love to listen with their eyes, I was at least willing to mic it up and give it a try.
Do or do not. There is no try.
Now this is where the pieces finally started to click together. I did a video on the STL Colin Richardson amp hub a couple of years back, and one of my favorite presets on there was called the Halfworks, which was sort of a Heartwork type of setup with a Marshall cab combined with a 57 and a Sennheiser MD421. The speakers they used, of course, weren't mentioned. Hold on a second here. 57 and 421? Now, I've been fortunate enough to sit in on sessions with both Cameron Webb and Ulrich Wald, both of which are fans of recording guitar cabinets with a blend of a 57 and a tom mic. In Cameron's case, it was a 421, and in Ulrich's case, it was an Audix D4. Now, I did an in-depth video on this technique a few years ago called The Greatest Metal Guitar Recording Technique I Ever Learned, and I'll link to that at the end of this video. Many thanks go to Ulrich Wald for being awesome and breaking it down for me. And it's worth mentioning that both Ulrich and Cameron are incredible engineers and have made some truly amazing records. But they also both worked for Terry Date at one point. Terry Date, of course, has a mile-long list of credits, including Pantera, Deftones, Soundgarden, Prong, records with just absolutely gigantic guitar tones. Now, given that some of Terry's best-sounding guitar tones were made at the time when the T75 was popular, and Colin Richardson's Heartwork type preset is using a 57 and a 421, and Heartwork was recorded using a custom double-wide cabinet loaded with T75s, and Cameron, who worked for Terry, likes 57s and 421s blended, and the Kennedy assassination happened at precisely... hold on a sec. I might be going a little too far down the rabbit hole there. But I think the likely scenario as to why the T75 is so difficult to record is that it sounds like absolute crap with a single SM57. But if we add in a Sennheiser 421, suddenly the game changes. By crom sweaty balls, what is that? All right, guys, I'm at the desk. I want to show you real quick what's going on here and how you can apply this concept to your own recording. So we've got this amazing guitar sound. And if you had told me 10 years ago I was going to get that sound out of T75s, I would have been like, what are you smoking? Anyway, so we've got this really cool guitar sound, also combined with a really, really badass bass tone. This, of course, is using Element Bass and my 3-stage preset with a little bit of that 3D sound going on as well. Just drops into the mix so well. If you haven't got yourself a copy of Element Bass yet, run, don't walk. Go get yourself a copy and save yourself endless amounts of grief. Because the key to a great guitar sound is a great bass tone. And Element Bass makes it easy to get. Anyway, okay, so I'm using a very, very simple principle here to make this work, to make this happen. And if you've got a pair of mics, you can try this on your own cabs. So if we listen to the 57 by itself, it's pretty thin sounding. And if we throw in the 421, That's pretty spiky as well, but when we put them together, that sounds pretty damn fat. Let me show you what's going on. Here's the deal. You guys always hear me talking about null test, null test, null test. What happens if we null these guys? We're going to flip the polarity on the 421s. Check this out. This is what we get. Now that sounds fucking horrible, doesn't it? That's phase being canceled from mic to mic, and we're using that phase cancellation to our advantage because that sound that we're hearing right there, that's what's being taken away from the sound. Once again, 57s, 421s, and together. Sometimes the solution to a problem you've been struggling with forever is so elegant and so simple you completely overlook it because you think it's going to be way more difficult than it really is. Now let's be clear here. I managed to get that sound not because I knew best or knew what was going to work, but because I was willing to try an idea despite having failed at it many times before. I applied new knowledge to an old problem and got what might be the best guitar sound I've ever got in my entire career, with a T75 no less. Now the best part is it doesn't sound like every other modern metal guitar sound in existence. It's not from a preset and it's not from a profile. It was achieved using borrowed gear that I had to give back. Now will I ever get that exact same tone again? Probably not, and that's okay. Because that's what makes it special. Familiarity breeds contempt, and too much of a good thing can turn something that was fresh and exciting into bland and stale. But I did manage to find an old set of T75s from the late 80s for dirt cheap online. And that's the beauty of it. They're not as popular as greenbacks or vintage 30s, and you can find them for bargain basement prices. I dropped a pair into a rev cab and an X pattern with another hidden gem speaker, the Mototone BV30H, which I'm going to feature in an upcoming episode. So how do my own T75s sound? Let's check them out. It might have taken me a decade or two to figure out how to make the T75 work, but I did eventually get it right. And the satisfaction of achieving a goal because I worked for it and learned how to fix the problem is far more satisfying than dialing in someone else's preset and using their sound. I just wish I'd been able to get that sound a lot earlier and get that onto some clients' records. I probably would have had a much more different career because of it. But remember, this is real life. It's not The Force Awakens. We're not automatically great at everything. The learning process is the part that's worth doing. And that's the big difference between thinking like a guitar player and thinking like an engineer.